Alright, so let's continue working with Blade as usual. First, let's make sure your server is running. And now I would like you to grab some external code. So there are a couple of ways you can get this code. Obviously, you only need to get this code if you follow along, you code along, otherwise just don't worry about that. So if you're watching on Udemy, this is attached to this lecture resources. Otherwise, go to github.com with my name, Piotr Jura, Udemy, Laravel course 2023. You can also Google that, it's really easy to find. And inside this L10 task list resources, open this file. So we will just need some additional code to further our work with Blade, so we can actually start building the task list application. Now, you can either click this button to copy the contents or just select this manually and copy that code. So once you have this, go into the project, into web.php and paste that code before the first route. Like so, just scroll to the top and make sure you remove this additional PHP tag and save the changes. We will be using this example data of tasks to pass it to our views and start building our real task list up. Okay, so let's take a quick look at what code we have pasted. So there is a task class, and we have created this dummy class and this array of task objects, so we can kind of simulate working with database models, as we haven't learned about how to work with databases yet in Laravel, but we would like to have an environment that is as close as possible to how we will work with databases once we learn about them in this course. So we would like to pass this data to Blade views so we can learn something about Blade without having to introduce database concepts. All right, so this endpoint is responsible for displaying a list of all tasks. So let's get rid of this name variable here, and instead we will be passing the tasks to this endpoint, which we have inside this tasks variable. But since that's an anonymous function, and in PHP to access variables outside anonymous functions, you need to add a use statement after those first pair of parentheses and specify the name of the variable you want to make available to this anonymous function. And now let's work on Blade. So we don't need this block anymore. Instead, what I would like you to do right now is to display a list of all the tasks that we have passed. Now let me also say that this isSet directive is not used very often. So it is not a normal practice to always be checking if certain variable is defined in Blade. Typically, you use a template only once, and you use it for a specific endpoint, for a specific route, so you more or less know what variables to expect. So isSet is mostly used if you have, or the set of variables passed to the template can be different or can change, but that's not used very often. So just an explanation here that you don't always have to check if variable is defined. All right, now let's learn about another directive, which is a simple if statement. So we can use if statement, if directive in Blade to check for some conditions. One of those conditions can be if, for example, our tasks array has any elements in it. So we can use count function, count PHP function for that. So let's do that. We do if count tasks. You can check if it's more than 0 or just leave it like that. So if there are any tasks, we would display them, but for now, let's say there are tasks. And then we add else for an alternative, and we display the text that there are no tasks. And we need to close that using and if. Let's also fix this to be a header of size, well, the biggest one possible, and say the list of tasks. Right, now save the changes, and let's make sure that our app is running. Well, it's not running. All right, so let me run PHP artisan serve. Apparently, I'm in the wrong directory. That's the correct one. Let me run PHP artisan serve again. And there you have it. So we got the header, and we know that there are some tasks. Okay, so that was an if statement, if directive, and then to display a list of elements like arrays or collections. Collection is a Laravel specific object. We'll learn about them later on. We can use for each directive or for each loop, for each statement. So let's use that. So that would be this case. So we do for each tasks as task, and we close the for each, and inside we will display the task. So using this for each loop, we get access to every task that is inside this array. So we get access to a task object, which has the following properties. So there is title, description, etc. So let's display every task title. As a reminder, you do that using double curly braces. So we do task title. All right, so we displayed all the tasks that we have. But alternatively, checking if there is anything on the list is something that you do very often. So instead of mixing the for each or any kind of for loop with an if statement like here, you can immediately go for this for else directive, which will display all the elements on the list if there are any. So this would normally iterate over all the elements, or if the list is empty, you display the alternative. So let's do that. We can get rid of this if statement, or maybe I'll just comment it out so you can see it for future reference. And instead, that's for else. So let's do for else and for else, and let's move this block here, and it's not else in this case, it is empty. We should see the same result. So as expected, this still works. Alright, so we've got a list of tasks, but eventually you would like to have a separate view, a separate route where you display one single task with all the information about a task. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's modify our app so we can get rid of those examples. We don't really need them anymore. We can just leave them for future reference. And let's create a route that's responsible for displaying one single task. So this would be /id. Then there is the function which gets the task ID. And this would be responsible for displaying one single task, though we will create a view for it later. For now, I would just like to generate or add a link to this page. But first, let's give it a name. So let's call that tasks show. And this one, let's also give it a name. This would be tasks index. Now, those names are not accidental. Later on, you will learn about the so-called resource controllers and the convention of how you should name certain routes in Laravel, which would not only make it simpler for you, but also for others using Laravel. So at this point, just so you know, you should have some common prefix of a route name if the route is revolving around certain resource. In this case, this is a task. And the route that displays a list of elements should be called index. The route that displays one single element should have this show suffix. All right, so we've got those two routes, and now let's generate a link to a specific task. So inside Blade, let's remove that temporarily and add an A element, paste that back, and let's generate the link. And this is quite easy to do if you have the named routes, as you only need to use a route function. You specify the route name, which would be suggested to you using the VS Code plugins, so you can quickly see that you want the tasks show. And then you can pass parameters. We know that there is an ID parameter, and this is also suggested here, so that's really nice. And the ID parameter would be, can you guess it? The task ID. So this is how it looks. All right, so those are all links. If you click on them, you can see that this leads to the proper route, which is not ready yet. It doesn't display all the task details, though we can see that the parameter is in the URL and also that it generates proper links to proper pages. All right, so let's quickly summarize what we've learned. So we are passing an array to this route. We know that we should call the routes using specific names, that there should be some common prefix, and that the route that displays all items should have index suffix, one item. It should have a show suffix. Then you've learned about the if statement. You know how to check if a collection or array contains any elements at all. Then you've learned about the for loop, how to display a list of elements. And finally, we've learned about the for else directive, which is just a common occurrence that you first check if there are any elements on the list, and then you render each individual item and provide an alternative message. And then finally, you've learned how you can easily generate URLs, links to other pages, using the route function inside Blade by passing the route name and route parameters as a second argument.